And a very good morning to you. How you doing this Sunday morning, the 23rd of June 2019? Yes, it's 3 years to the day that the UK went to the polls and voted to leave the European Union. 3 years to the day, so it is. It's a lovely morning here in Salford and Greater Manchester. My name is Richie Allen, by the way. How you doing? Hope you're well. Hope you've had a great weekend thus far. Lots to get into in Sunday View. Lots to get into. And I look forward to hearing from you through Twitter. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter, as you know by now. Thanks for joining me.
Asking the questions mainstream journalists will never ask. This is your Richie Allen Show on richieallen.co.uk, Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, and triggerwarning.tv. It's the Richie Allen Show, broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Oh, there's lots to talk about, so there is. Lots to talk about. And we'll just dive right into it and we will ixnay the theme tune, is what we'll do. Yes, 3 years ago, I voted at St. Kentigern's Primary School on Wilbraham Road in Manchester. The first vote I participated in for forever. And I had to justify that at that particular time by explaining myself to you. But I went down there and voted leave, along with 52% of everybody else who voted. And here we are. Here we are, still in the European Union, with no real prospect, in my opinion, of ever leaving the blasted thing. No prospect at all. We're going to just jump straight into the papers. I'll tell you why, because there's a lot to get through this particular programme, and I'm wondering, will I have time? Now, we're going to start with the Sunday Express. Why won't Boris tell us what happened? Why won't he? What happened, Boris? What happened? The police were called to an apartment shared by Boris Johnson and his girlfriend, Miss Symonds, the other night, Friday night. And there's raw August Rulia Bulia in the press. There's a lot going on in the world today. A lot of very serious things. The papers are obsessed with this story today. So I'll read you the headlines and then we'll get more of the story, right? Sunday Express, why won't Boris tell us what happened? Sunday Mirror, Boris row was so frightening I had to call the police. Those were his neighbours. Sunday Telegraph, left-wing neighbours admit taping Boris row. The Sunday Times, Boris is a security risk. They're taking a different angle on it, namely that because Boris has a very tumultuous and colourful private life, it might make him vulnerable to blackmail from foreign powers. Boris Johnson and every other high-profile politician has possibly been blackmailed, well, from the time or the moment that they entered mainstream or mainline politics. I would suppose, I would surmise, I would imagine the intelligence agencies have cabinet files stacked up to the ceiling with dirt on the likes of Boris Johnson. I would say, but that's just my opinion. So that's the Sunday Times then. This caricature, Boris Johnson might be vulnerable to blackmail from foreign powers. The Mail on Sunday, bust up Boris, hit by shock poll blow. So apparently, before Friday's incident, the domestic that the police were called to, apparently, Boris Johnson had an 8% lead over Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary. But that's been whittled down now to 3% after the news of this row broke. So they piled in on Boris Johnson. Now, I've foregone telling you about this row, this argument. Right? Because I'm assuming that even if you're listening in Timbuktu, you'll know what it's all about. Johnson's girlfriend is a woman called Carrie Symonds. And on Friday night, she had an argument with Boris, allegedly. We know this because Boris and Carrie's neighbours took some audio of it, they recorded it on their phone, and then they gave it to The Guardian. They called the police and they gave the audio to The Guardian. And you could hear Symonds telling Boris allegedly to get out of her flat, and Boris was saying, "Don't break me effing laptop, whatever you do." And they had a row. And the papers are loving it. Now, this was Friday night. Yesterday afternoon, there was hustings, so there was. And the hustings took place in Birmingham. And hustings, what are hustings? Well, candidates meet before they meet and they speak to the party membership. So you've got a leadership election going on. Boris Johnson, Jeremy Hunt. And the hustings are when they face their own people, their own members, their fellow party members, and try to convince them they are worthy of their vote. Now, this was chaired yesterday by a guy called Ian Dale, who's a Conservative himself and presents a radio show for LBC. And Dale, gamely to his credit, tried to bring this up, but Johnson was having none of it anyway. So the guy who recorded the row and then gave it to The Guardian and called the police, a guy called Tom Penn, is defending his actions today, saying that he was worried about the neighbours' safety, saying he hoped that anybody would have done the same thing. But unfortunately for Mr. Penn and for his own partner, it's emerging that they have a very definitive political point of view. It's emerging that they don't like the Conservative Party, nor do they like Boris Johnson very much. And the woman, the partner of this guy, Tom Penn, has tweeted out before tweets about telling Johnson to F off as she's passed him in the street. So it's all very mysterious. The police turned up and they obviously made inquiries. They asked Ms. Symonds, presumably, "Are you all right there?" She said, "Yeah, we've had a bit of a row," presumably. And the police said, "Nothing to see here," and they've walked away. But it's on every newspaper today, and all of the talk shows this morning were full of it. I'm not going to bore you to death with too much of it, but a number of Johnson's political opponents felt that now was the perfect time, well, to weigh in, including the Scottish First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. Here's what Sturgeon had to say. Sorry. My hand slipped. Apologies, my hand slipped. Here's the real Sturgeon.
No. In a word. He was a foreign secretary with a risible tenure. He didn't display any basic competence or seriousness of purpose in that job. Brexit has damaged the UK's international reputation in the last few years, but close behind that, Boris Johnson's tenure as Foreign Secretary has damaged that reputation. He seems to have had a political career where he's gone out of his way to be gratuitously offensive to as many people and groups as possible. So I'm afraid I don't think he will be a good Prime Minister, and I find it actually quite hard to get my head around that, knowing everything they know about him, the Tories are even contemplating putting him into number 10.
Ian Blackford caused a lot of controversy when he said that Boris Johnson was racist. Is he?
I agree with Ian Blackford's comments. I mean,
so you think that Boris Johnson's racist?
Boris Johnson has made overtly racist comments. Now, I don't know what's in Boris Johnson's head when he says those things. I don't know what he's thinking, what motivates him, what he actually feels about those things. But if anybody, Boris Johnson or anybody else, makes the kind of comments that he has done...
Saying someone has made racist comments is a big thing
the comment he made about Muslim women looking like letterboxes, the things that
so
I
people
actually...
who criticise the burqa are racist?
Well, you can criticise the burqa. Personally, I think it's up to women to decide what they wear and don't wear. But you can...
Well, it's obviously up to women to decide what they wear and don't wear. But are you positing, Jimmy Cranky, that men can't have an opinion on the burqa? I've got an opinion on the burqa. You know, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing to wear. It's ludicrous is what it is. I remember many years ago when I was living on the Costa del Sol, bumped into a gentleman who came across to Caroline and myself, and he was from one of the Gulf states. I can't remember which one. And he came across because he'd heard my radio show, and because my radio show was very critical of US imperialism and Britain and Israel, he wanted to come over and say hello. But his wife came with him, And you couldn't see his wife because she was top to toe in the burqa. And hands, everything, no skin showing. You could barely see the eyes. And I just thought, it's ridiculous. And I'm entitled to think that. I'm not commenting on the religion or the religious beliefs or the people personally. I just think it is ridiculous. And obviously Johnson does as well. And I don't like Boris Johnson. How could I have anything in common with him? But it's a ridiculous thing to wear, in my opinion. So you can't call somebody racist for saying the women look like letterboxes.
And don't wear, but you can criticise the burqa without being deeply offensive.
How can you criticise the burqa without being deeply offensive? Somebody's going to be offended. So you might as well say it looks like a letterbox. You might as well say it looks like what you think it looks like. God forbid that people can't say what it is they think or say something they think is amusing anymore.
Calling a Muslim woman a letterbox or looking like a bank robber, some of the things he said about black people, I wouldn't even repeat because I don't think it's appropriate to do so.
Now, Sophie Rich should jump right in here because now she's bringing alleged racism against black people. And the presenter has a duty here of care to the audience and to Boris Johnson to say what comments are those that he made about black people exactly. But Ridge doesn't say anything.
So the point I'm making, I don't know whether he just does that for effect to grab headlines or if that is what he really thinks. I can't tell.
Well, it works one way or the other, doesn't it? Whether he's doing it for effect or because it's what he thinks, it gets him headlines. It gets him noticed, and a certain class of people or a certain class of thinking likes it, and they like him because of it. Donald Trump, anyone?
But I do think people who are prepared to make comments like that can't suddenly throw their hands up in horror when people call them out for it and say that they appear to be racist as a result of it.
I don't think he's ever thrown his hands up in horror and complained about being attacked. I think Johnson is very clever. He might come across as a bumbling, moronic type figure, dishevelled and all the rest of it, but he's not stupid. There is no such thing as bad publicity. I've never heard Johnson complain about being called racist. He's actually stood up a week or so ago saying that we should always be prepared to say what it is we think and be damn it, basically. So they piled in from every angle. I could play you loads, but I won't because it isn't interesting. Okay? Apparently Carrie Symonds has spoken to friends who've spoken to The Sun to say that the row was just an argument and it got heated. Apparently she's combustible, some of her friends are saying, and apparently he is as well. What a mix. They had an argument over something, they started screaming. Not ideal, but I'm not immune to it myself. As an Irishman, I can be a bit of a screamer. Right? Okay. So, for a bit of balance, here's Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak is an MP, he's a Tory, and he's Boris's mate. So, Rishi Sunak, is Boris a racist? Are you racist now, Father?
Well, Sophie, first of all, I personally wouldn't be sitting here supporting Boris if I thought he was racist. So it's something I care very deeply about. And when you look at the context of that article about the burqa, first of all, an independent panel looked at it and they described it as in the round being respectful and tolerant. And of course, people are going to take particular comments out of context. But the article was making a very liberal argument about the right of women to choose what they would like to wear. And at the time when other European countries, who Nicola Sturgeon's very, very fond of us being connected closer to, they were going around banning the burqa, and here was Boris making an argument that women shouldn't be banned, they should be able to make that choice for themselves.
I mean, she's also talking about some of the things he said about black people. I believe she's referring to a Telegraph column in 2002, yes, quite a long time ago, admittedly, where he was writing up Tony Blair. They say he's shortly off to the Congo. No doubt the AK-47s will fall silent and the pangas will stop their hacking of human flesh and the tribal warriors will all break out in watermelon smiles.
Well, I haven't read that particular article, but the broad point I'd say is Boris has very clearly apologised for any offence that he's caused through any of the thousands and thousands of articles he's written over a very long journalistic career.
Is this someone who's always going to say anything to get along?
No, I don't think it's about saying anything. This is someone who does have a particular way of communicating, which does seem to work. He's won 2 elections in a place which people thought Conservatives couldn't win. He won a referendum campaign that people thought was not possible to win. And he's able to do those things because he has a way of engaging the public, and it's because he speaks in a way that they understand, that's direct, that gets through to them.
Gets through to them. Does Boris get through to you, dear listener? Final word on this then to the same MP, Rishi Sunak, on the police attending the flat. What does he say about that? Does he have anything to say about that? Let's find out.
Well, look, I think the thing we do know, as you said, is that the police were called, and of course that's something that people are going to be rightly interested in. But then let's just look at that. The police were called to an incident, and what did they say? They said everybody was safe, everybody was well, there was no concerns that the officers had, and there was no cause for any further action. And given that's what the police have said, and it's clearly a private incident, I wasn't there, you weren't there, I think we should just leave it at that.
Pretty much, and we'll leave it there as well. It's 15 minutes past 11. This is Sunday View with me, Richie Allen, broadcasting live from Salford in Greater Manchester on Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, triggerwarning.tv, my own website, of course, and TuneIn Radio. Love being on TuneIn Radio. The programme is archived on iTunes, on Spotify. It's archived on podomatic.com. Hundreds and hundreds, nay, thousands of programmes going back years available through the medium of Spotify. The Observer. This is really interesting now. And if anybody is following Neil Saunders of neilsaundersmindcontrol.com, who's made several appearances on this programme, on the Richie Allen Show, talking about the influence of various companies and think tanks on the rise of the alternative right. This is an interesting story in The Observer. Carol Cadwallader, she's been all over this. Cambridge Analytica and the Heritage Foundation and all of this stuff, which is important. Because while The Observer leads with the row between Boris and his girlfriend, it also goes with a story linking Boris Johnson to the former campaign manager for Donald Trump, the man we know as Steve Bannon. New evidence suggesting close links between Boris Johnson and Steve Bannon can be revealed, calling into question the former Foreign Secretary's previous denials of an association with the influential far-right activist. So Johnson has denied ever having much to do or anything to do with Steve Bannon. But he's not been telling the truth, has Boris. He's been telling porky pies. Because The Observer has gotten some video evidence, a little snippet from a documentary, and it shows Steve Bannon talking about how he worked with Johnson, how he contacted him, how he spoke with him, and how he helped write his first speech after resigning as Foreign Secretary. Do you remember that? Over Theresa May's Brexit strategy 18 months ago, Johnson resigned and did a kind of a Churchillian type speech. Steve Bannon was part of the crafting of that speech. Let's have a little listen to the audio, which, as I said, is from a documentary. The documentary was made by a woman called Alison Clayman, and it's called The Brink. Here's Steve Bannon talking about Johnson and contradicting statements made by Johnson himself that he didn't have much to do with him at all. Have a listen.
He'll be at Commons. He's going to give a speech in Commons today that's going to throw down. He just went back to the Daily Telegraph as a columnist. I've been talking to him all weekend about this speech.
Did you talk to him on the phone?
Went back and forth over text. It's just easier. I talked to him initially on the phone, but then it's just easier to go back and forth on text. I've been telling him that my recommendation is that he gave one of the most important political speeches of 2016 was his closing speech. It was a 3 to 5 minute speech in June of 2016. His closing argument on national TV for the Leave campaign. He was the official head of the Leave campaign, or one of the co-heads, I think it was. And he gave a speech on national TV. They had a debate that night, and it was magnificent. And all I was telling him all weekend is just to incorporate those themes, the same themes. Basically, he was saying that June 23rd was Independence Day for Great Britain. Their Independence Day would be like our July 4th.
Was that the date of?
That's the day of the vote, yeah. And that's the
front page.
Yeah. It's time to believe in our Great Britain. Johnson and rally call for the nation to look to a brighter post-Brexit future. This is the tee up, all right? He's back. Boris, a journalist, before he's mayor of London and before he's foreign secretary, wrote a great book on Churchill. That's one of the things I did tell him over the weekend, that his great love of Churchill and his great study of Churchill. And he wrote a really fantastic book for a modern audience on Churchill. I met Boris Johnson, kind of met him at these things years ago, but it's just one of those, shake hands, I'm sure he didn't remember me, but really met him he flew over right after we went. Our guys in Breitbart London had a lot of contact with him during the Brexit thing. I didn't want to get involved because it was very British, right? So I didn't want to, exert myself. Although I was controlling editorial, it was to let Raheem and James Dellingpole. Dellingpole had been a columnist like Boris at the Daily Telegraph. To let those guys be the guys, in contact. We really had the most contact with the other Leave, which was Nigel Farage. But then right after we won, Boris flew over because their victory was as unexpected as ours, and then I got to know him quite well in the transition period.
Yeah, what's really important about that is we've talked a lot over the years about the fascist dictatorship that is the European Union and why it's so very important that countries extricate themselves from it and return their parliaments to sovereignty and ultimately return their elections to sovereignty, right? And I've explained for years and years and years and years. Now, the work that Neil Sanders, more than anybody in the world, has done on this is to demonstrate that the public face of Leave in the United Kingdom, basically Nigel Farage, and to a lesser extent then people like Boris Johnson and Liam Fox and David Davis, that they are being driven by the alternative right or the conservative right, the neocon right in the United States. And the abuse that Neil Sanders took from committed Brexiteers when he started writing about this was almost kind of, I won't say it was unprecedented, but it was crazy to see across Google, across YouTube, particularly when he was on this programme. Because what he's concluded, to sum it up, is that there is a shadowy cabal, working within a shadowy cabal, that sees the European project as a threat to United States hegemony in the world. Okay? And that has driven the emergence of the alternative right, the support for Donald Trump, news organisations like Breitbart and others, but very influential and previously unknown think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, companies like Cambridge Analytica, weaponising the whole debate around Europe and about migration and rallying people towards supporting Leave. But not necessarily because those people want to liberate the United Kingdom and return power to the people and to the sovereign parliament. No, these people have their own designs for the world. I've not done a marvellous job of summing that up there, but you get the picture. Okay, so it's like the emergence of two groups globally. The elite behind the European Union project, which is all about killing sovereignty, ending sovereignty, impoverishing countries, and through the enforcement of impoverishing countries and then the enforcement of austerity and stealing all those countries' assets, rendering those countries as nothing but vassal states. That's the whole European Union project, fiscal, military and political union. It's a terrible thing. It's a dreadful thing. But Sanders has pointed out, and he'll be all over this story today with the emergence of this audio of Steve Bannon. Sanders is all about that. His whole research shows that there are some very, very dark people who want the European Union to break up, but for their own reasons. Not for the reasons you and I want to see the breakup of the European Union. And he's done amazing work on that, Neil. And I reckon you should go to neilsandersmindcontrol.com and read it. And don't read it with a chip on your shoulder because you know the European Union is fascist. We know it is. Read it anyway and see who's behind these people. Giving Boris Johnson the keys to number 10 is irrelevant because he's a puppet. Doesn't matter whether it's him, Farage, Jeremy Corbyn, doesn't matter. And that's where people have to go. You've got to go beyond that to who's controlling these people and what it is they really want. So Neil has done great work showing that there are two squabbling global forces at work here. The neocon Zionists in the United States, in DC, and the European Central Bank, the European project. But ultimately, and he said this himself on my programme, he's agreed with me, ultimately, both of these competing groups serve the same master. And you know who that master is. You know who that cabal really is. That's the thing you've got to get your head round. I didn't plan to talk too much about this morning, so I've gone around in circles a little bit there, but you understand what it is. Leaving the European Union is brilliant, but some of those behind pushing to leave and behind Vote Leave and the other Leave campaigns are very sinister forces indeed, who have no interest in making the world a better place. These are people who have designs on the NHS, okay? These are the people who want to privatise every square inch of every country on planet Earth. That's who these people are. And that's the thing. I've always been consistent there. Always. You know, I get people saying sometimes, you sound a bit conservative, Richie. Well, no, what I'm doing is I'm highlighting something that was said by a conservative in order to make a point. It doesn't mean I like the guy. Or any of them, for that matter. Right, it's 26 minutes past the hour. I think we've time for a tune, because there's always time for a tune. Sunday View on richieallen.co.uk. Welcome to it. Love to have your company every Sunday. Back with plenty more news after this from Coldplay. Good morning to you. Music sounds better in the sunshine, doesn't it? Coldplay, Viva La Vida on the Richie Allen Show. Let's move right on. Good morning to Murray. How you doing, Murray? Richie, the City of London wanted us out because the European Union wants to tax havens, says Murray. Not sure about that, but thanks, my friend. Chris tweets, who was getting pilloried for sharing a platform and shaking hands with Bannon might have been George Galloway. Do people in general know who Steve Bannon is? Donald Trump, David Duke, KKK, Charlottesville, and all of that. Cheers for that, Chris. Hi to David, who tweets on the burqa row. So let's ask the question, why is it okay in this so-called progressive and equal world for some religions to oppress women and for it to be vociferously defended? Riddle me that, Batman, says David. Paul Burchill tweets, what a miserable sneak, the guy recording a row between Boris Johnson and his partner. Obviously, they must have had many rows, but this one was used to smear Johnson, says Paul Burchill. Thanks so much for that. Yeah, apparently it was over a glass of red wine that he spilled on a white couch, which would incur the wrath of any woman, or any man for that matter. Right. Yeah. Right. Let's move on. Good morning to Gail as well. Right, let's move on. Let's talk about something else. Last newspaper then, the Star on Sunday leads with let's kick Bulger killer out of the United Kingdom. This is an unconfirmed story, but the Star is claiming that John Venables, who murdered Jamie Bulger, was one of two boys that murdered Jamie Bulger many years ago, is set to be moved abroad, and it might be Canada, Australia or New Zealand, but that is unconfirmed. Little bit of Brexit news to bring you, not too much though, but it's about a letter that was written towards the end of last week. It's in the newspapers today. A letter to Jeremy Corbyn by 26 Labour MPs. So 26 backbenchers have signed a letter to Jeremy Corbyn urging him to put the national interest first and to back a deal before October 31st. So these backbench MPs are saying that Brexit must be delivered. They are saying that a no-deal outcome would alienate many who supported the party at the last general election. But on the flip side, they said that there shouldn't be a second referendum because it would give the populist right an even greater platform in our heartlands. So these Labour MPs are saying that Brexit must be delivered to avoid a no-deal. And the way to do that is to back some sort of deal. And these Labour MPs are saying there should not be a second referendum because the far right or populist right will do better in so-called Labour heartlands in the near future. Okay, now the party is going to back a second referendum. It'll be announced by Jeremy Corbyn early this week, that the party now supports a second referendum. So one of the 26 backbench MPs who signed the letter warning Corbyn to find some way to support a deal is Caroline Flint. And she spoke with Andrew Marr this morning on the Marr Show, and Marr asked her, are the 26 signatories, are you threatening Corbyn?
No, not a threat. I think the 26 Labour MPs who signed that letters and many others who've privately shared their concerns with me have been saying the same thing for a long time now. We won a situation in 2017 where we didn't win the election, but we returned better than we thought, and we did so on the promise of respecting the referendum and working to get a good deal. And those of us who signed this letter and others believe that we should respect that promise. Okay. And that is what has been Labour Party policy, and that is what is meant to have guided us through Parliament.
For those people watching who haven't read the letter yet, here is a relevant extract, the crucial extract. Brexit must happen, you say. The UK must leave and do so without further undue delay. A commitment to a second referendum would be toxic to our bedrock Labour voters.
Correct.
Correct. I suppose one of the questions out of that is, are you not likely to lose more seats to the Lib Dems than to anybody else if you don't go in the other direction?
No, not at all. I mean, when you look at the polling based on present figures, it is clear that, for example, in David's seat in South Shields that used to represent, that would go, all the seats in Sunderland, all the seats in Barnsley, across Wolverhampton, across Stoke, and many more. And those Labour Leave voters are likely to go to the Brexit party. So the danger for the party, and this isn't just about an electoral calculation.
So how many seats would Labour lose, do you think, to the Brexit party if you go ahead in the second referendum direction?
One of the polls suggests it's something like 40 plus. So the thing, and also to the Tories as well in that mix, but we would be losing in our heartland seats. And this isn't just about, electoral advantage. This actually goes to the heart of what the Labour Party is about. If we do not speak for the working class voices of Britain, then what's the point of the Labour Party?
A very good question, because socialism is incompatible with membership of the European Union. And Flint understands it on some level, even though she's stringently against leaving with no deal. She understands that the European Union has been devastating for working class people and their families. People like me. Working class folks. Anyway, you've heard that before. Let's talk about Iran for a minute, because it's emerged today that following the downing of a United States spy drone by Iran on Thursday, following that, apparently the United States launched a cyber attack on an Iranian weapons system. So this is emerging this morning, right? According to the Washington Post, the cyber attack disabled computer systems controlling rocket and missile launchers. This was the retaliation for the shooting down of the US drone and for the alleged attacks on oil tankers that the United States has blamed Iran for, even though there's no evidence that Iran did it. No reason why Iran would do it. So there's no independent confirmation that the cyber attack did any damage to the Iranian systems. There's still a lot of talk, a lot of articles in the paper today dealing with the response of Donald Trump to the drone attack, or to the shooting down of the drone by the Iranians, because Trump apparently was about to launch missile strikes on radar positions inside Iran, but then stopped it at the last minute when he realised that more than 100 people would be killed. That's the official Donald Trump position anyway. They were going to attack the radar facility on the Iranian coast by firing at it, but I decided not to say Trump, because I asked, and then I was told that people would die. So now it's emerging that the response was some sort of cyber attack. Okay? The former UK Foreign Secretary David Miliband was on the Marr Show today. We should be worried by what's going on, says David Miliband, a man, by the way, who backed the illegal invasion of Iraq. We should be worried, he says.
We should be very worried about the real prospect of a hot war between Iran and the United States. We were 10 minutes away from that on Thursday night. There are people in the senior reaches of the US administration who want a war with Iran. They've said so very clearly. And there are some people on the Iranian side who are itching to get at the Americans too, partly for domestic reasons. got to understand is that a war between the US and Iran will not be restricted to US and Iran. It will be a contagion right across, a conflagration
Saudi
across the
Arabia,
region.
Israel, and ultimately ourselves?
Well, Afghanistan is an obvious flashpoint. Iraq is an obvious flashpoint. And I think that it's very important. I think a Foreign Office Minister is going to Tehran today. That's a good thing. It's a pity he's not going with his European counterparts. But there are some very practical things that need to be on the agenda. I mean, one is about the safety of shipping in the Straits of Hormuz. Britain and the rest of the international community should be talking about an international force that ensures the safety of passage of all ships through the Straits of Hormuz. Secondly, the Iranians need to understand that their threat to flout the nuclear agreement that President Trump pulls out of can only provide excuses for those in the US and elsewhere who want to take them on. So I think we should be very worried, and we need some very active diplomacy.
Yeah, but of course Iran is not in violation of that nuclear deal. It isn't. This has been confirmed by the International Atomic Energy Agency multiple times. Iran has not violated even the terms of the deal. It hasn't done. And Miliband must know this. The super Zionist, Ed Miliband. And as for being worried about Iran, it's a pity he wasn't so circumspect back in 2002. Because if he was, back in 2002, maybe 1 million Iraqis would still be alive, and 3 million of them would not have had to leave their home. And the place wouldn't be overrun now by lunatic jihadis, maybe. So more from Miliband briefly. What of the news then? That Donald Trump stopped the attack, or stopped a retaliatory attack, after asking how many people would be killed. What does Miliband think of that?
Pretty worrying that that question hadn't been raised
a little bit
in
earlier.
The preceding 72 hours when they were discussing the issue. Look, there's a general thing here. We're living in a world where the international rules and norms are being flouted day by day. My own organisation is a humanitarian organisation. We do health and education and protection for women and kids. We've had 2 aid workers killed in the last week. We've got record numbers of civilians being killed in wars around the world. We've got 70 million refugees and internally displaced people, speaking to a crisis of diplomacy, but also a flouting of global rules and norms that were hard won at the end of the Second World War, reinforced after the Cold War. And I call it the age of impunity. It's an age when there's a division in global politics. Right. Been people who say, look, the law needs to be strengthened, and other people say the law's for suckers, and we can't afford that.
Yes, that's Israel, by the way. Global impunity. Global impunity. We live in an age of global impunity and global immunity where countries can do whatever they want, like Israel, which is in violation of hundreds of UN resolutions. But of course, Miliband is a good Zionist. Don't ever talk about Israel. We'll talk about Israel in a minute, though, and nuclear weapons, because Israel, of course, is the chief antagonist in the whole Iran debacle. Israel and its lunatic, psychotic Nazi government wants nothing more than the invasion of Iran. We'll talk about nuclear weapons in a minute. Tucker Carlson did a brilliant monologue on Iran this Friday, just gone. He's a Fox News presenter. I know what Fox are. I know. But this guy's interesting because when Bill O'Reilly left Fox because of allegations of misconduct and bad behaviour around women and all the rest of it, O'Reilly was an arch neocon Zionist apologist, wasn't he? Bill O'Reilly, do you remember him? O'Reilly, with his Irish ancestry, one of the worst, most despicable characters ever to present a news programme on any network anywhere in the world or in the galaxy. Dreadful human being. Turfed out of Fox, this guy, the arch neocon Zionist warmonger Bill O'Reilly, gone, and Tucker Carlson kind of took over from him. And I know what Carlson is, I know where he used to work, and I know some of his opinions. But fair play to this guy Carlson. On the subject of invading countries and wars, Carlson is a bit better than the usual rabble. He did an excellent monologue on Iran and on John Bolton this Friday gone, and I'm going to play you some of it now. Here's Tucker.
In fact, last night was a high point in the Trump presidency. Bombing Iran would have ended his political career in a minute. There'd be no chance of re-election after that. Ill-advised wars are like doing cocaine. The initial rush rises your poll numbers, but the crash is inevitable, and in this case, it would be horrible. The hangover from an Iraq war would last years. Iran is not Syria or Iraq. It's a big, rich, sophisticated country with an ancient culture and a cohesive population. In some ways, it's an impressive place, not at all like the chintzy prefab capitals of the Arab world, like Riyadh or Dubai. We could beat Iran, but it would not be easy. It would cost trillions of dollars. Many thousands of Americans likely would die. China would love it. They'd be the only winners in that conflict. Donald Trump was elected president precisely to keep us out of disasters like war with Iran. So how did we get so close to starting one? Simple. The neocons still wield enormous power in Washington. They don't care what the cost of a war with Iran is. They certainly don't care what the effect on Trump's political fortunes might be. They despise Donald Trump. Now, one of their key allies is the National Security Advisor of the United States. John Bolton is an old friend of Bill Kristol's. Together, they helped plan the Iraq War. When Bolton made it to the White House, the neocons cheered.
The neocons did cheer, of course. John Bolton. Let's hear a bit more from Tucker Carlson. Now he plays a little segment of an interview that he himself did with John Bolton last year. So this is Tucker Carlson's monologue from Friday. In it, he refers back to an interview that he did with John Bolton last year. John Bolton is a maniac.
So you've called for regime change in Iraq, Libya, Iran, and Syria. In the first two countries, we've had regime change, and obviously it's been, I'd say, a disaster. I think we agree.
No, I don't agree with that. And let me. You
don't think it's been a disaster?
No, I think you need to understand. Is that life is complicated in the Middle East, and when you say, well, the overthrow of Saddam Hussein was a mistake, is simplistic.
I've been a professional broadcaster for many years, and I've always been professional. At least I think I have. Not always been great, or good even, but I've always been professional. I couldn't sit in the same room as John Bolton. I could interview Bolton, but as soon as Bolton starts saying that it's complicated in the Middle East and that you can't categorise the Iraq war as a mistake, I'm going to knock him fucking clean out. I would sacrifice my career there. I would. And I'm the pacifist who advocates non-violence. Sitting in a studio with a guy like John Bolton, I'm going to knock his head off his shoulders. I'm going to do as much damage to him as I possibly can before the studio manager, the floor manager and the gallery shake themselves out of their surprise and come to his assistance. In that 15 seconds, I'm going to do millions of pounds worth of plastic surgery to him, John Bolton. There's an evil running through people like that is almost impossible for me to define using the English language, using words. How could you sit there with that fucking animal who's responsible for the deaths of millions of people and not try to murder him when he says, I wouldn't categorise the Iraq war as a mistake? How could you sit there? How could you sit there? I don't think I could, to be honest. And like I said, I've been pretty much, whatever else I've been, an impeccably professional broadcaster, journalist and producer for the best part of 20 years. But I'd give it all up for a chance with Bolton.
I would argue that I'm the one who understands how complicated it is, but just my view.
It's your long experience in foreign policy. I know.
That's the point at which I would have killed him.
Better record than yours, I would say. Got that? Hillary Clinton's toppling of the Libyan government was not a disaster, says John Bolton. Keep in mind there are literally slave markets operating in the streets of Tripoli right now. No problem, though. Bolton's fine with that. He's fine with the outcome in Iraq, too. That wasn't a disaster either. According to John Bolton, it was a raging success. We killed hundreds of thousands of people, lost thousands of our own troops, spent more than $1 trillion, all to eliminate a WMD threat that, despite John Bolton's assurances, never existed in the first place. Bolton is glad we did all that, really happy about it. That's demented. Normal people don't talk like that. There's nothing normal about John Bolton. Check out this piece of tape, recently uncovered, in which Bolton promises that we're going to overthrow the government of Iran. Keep in mind that this was filmed long before the Iranians shot down a single drone.
I have said for over 10 years since coming to these events that the declared policy of the United States of America should be the overthrow of the mullah's regime in Tehran. And that's why before 2019, we here will celebrate in Tehran. Thank you very much.
In other words, last night has been in the works for years. John Bolton is a kind of bureaucratic tapeworm. Try as you might, you can't expel him. He seems to live forever in the bowels of the federal agencies, periodically re-emerging to cause pain and suffering, but critically somehow never suffering himself.
No, they don't send their own children, their own grandchildren. They don't send them off to countries around the world that have never threatened the United States to kill people, to murder innocent people, to rape and pillage and murder. Never. It's always the poorest people in America. It's always the people with nothing in the deep south, with nothing, with no job prospects, who are bullied into joining the fucking army and then are sent off to Afghanistan and Iraq to witness unimaginable fucking horrors by people like John Bolton, to murder. This is what Jordan Maxwell talks about when he talks about death cult and he talks about blood sacrifices. There's something going on with these people that's non-human. It couldn't be human to laugh and sneer about sending people to bomb fucking Bedouins, goat fucking herders, bombing them to oblivion, and you're talking about it as if you're talking about ordering out from whatever the fuck that you order out from on your smartphone. It's as simple as that. What will we have? We'll have a chicken fried rice, will we? And in the meantime, let's bomb a few villages in Iran. And what do you do about that, you know? What do you do about it? How do you deal with it when people are locked into right, left, us versus them, the voting paradigm? How do you get through to people? Unbelievable. Brilliant stuff by Tucker Carlson. And this is the guy that Donald Trump appointed as his national security advisor. QAnon my fucking arse. Yeah, deep state, yeah, Trump is putting it to them. Unbelievable. And that's what would have been going on, by the way, on Thursday. That's what would have been going on Thursday. You'd have had lunatics like Bolton and Mike Pompeo and Gina Haspel, the torturer-in-chief that became head of the CIA, saying, let's bomb the absolute piss out of Iran. And don't for a minute think that Donald Trump stopped it. He didn't. He didn't stop it. He's a liar, a pathological liar. He can't speak without lying. It was the Joint Chiefs, or it was the head of the military who said, look, it's not the best idea in the world. Not the best idea in the world. But first of all, we were caught with our trousers down in their waters, territorially, and in their airspace, number one. And number two, remember, all bullies, and the United States and Israel are nothing but bullies. All bullies are fucking cowards. They will not attack Iran because Iran can fight back. That's why they won't do it. At least not in the short term. They won't do it. Even though Bibi, the criminal, whose wife is going to go away for his financial misdeeds and crimes, by the way, speaking of cowards, huh? They're stoking it, begging the United States to do it. But you see, Iran is a sophisticated military operation and can defend herself. There'll be no marching on Tehran, as John Bolton is talking about, because the Iranians can fight back. And they can fight back hard. And as Carlson said, it would cost trillions of dollars to the US economy. Thousands and thousands of American soldiers would die. There's no coming back from it. But that's what they want. That's what the Zionist lunatic elites want. They want to set fire to the Middle East. But there are one or two calmer heads. And Donald Trump is not running the United States of America Incorporated. He isn't. He's a puppet. It's meant to look like he's running it. There are one or two calmer heads, even amongst the evil ones. And they're saying, no. Think of what's happening in Syria. Think of what happened in Libya. We can't just conquer this country and take it over. It just will not happen. So we've got to stop. Doesn't mean they're going to change their agenda or their plan for Iran at all, but it means they're going to come at it from a different angle. Don't believe the weird-haired pervert and sex offender Donald Trump when he says, I stopped it at the 11th hour on Thursday. No, you didn't. Or anything like it. Speaking of Israel, The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, very, very, very well respected organisation. And they provide analysis on the acquirement of weapons, on weapons sales, and on how conflicts around the world can be ended peacefully. They're a bunch of decent people. There's some weird and wonderful types there as well, but they're a decent organisation, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. And because of the pressure being applied to Iran economically, which is totally unjustified, and it is a crime against humanity, what the United States and its partners are trying to do sanction-wise to Iran is a crime, because Iran is not in contravention of the nuclear agreement. It isn't. As I said, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has confirmed this on numerous occasions. So because Israel is the chief antagonist here, the little bully, the little scumbag that hangs around with the big kid in the school playground, protected by the big tough kid, Israel demanding that Iran is obliterated, basically, and the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute points out this weekend, don't forget that Israel has around 90 nuclear weapons. And Dan Smith is the chief representative from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, which is known as SIPRI. He's the executive, the chief executive, Dan Smith, and he was on Russia Today the other day talking about Israel and its own nuclear arsenal.
You know, Israel has had nuclear weapons now since some point in the 1960s, so over 50 years, and has never commented publicly about the number. But I think that our estimate is in the same ballpark as estimates that others have made.
Why does Israel refuse to comment on its arsenal, and why won't it sign the treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons? As far as I know, Dan, every other state in the Middle East has signed, is that right?
Because Israel is run by Nazis, by psychotic, murderous, sick Nazi henchmen. That's what's in charge of Israel now. The Israeli people are no different than any people. In Israeli society, you've got fuckwits, you've got morons, you've got Egypts, you've got nice people, you've got humanitarians, and you've got family people. It's no different than anywhere else, but it's run by psychotic entities. Psychopaths. They've got 90 nuclear warheads. They know that Iran doesn't have any. They know that Iran doesn't really want to have any. Iran wants to enrich uranium for its own energy needs. They know this, but they want Iran to be blown off the face of the earth. The Israeli lunatics. So that's why they lie about their own arsenal. If you don't know anything about Israel and nuclear weapons, Google Mordecai Vanunu. I probably said that wrong. The whistleblower who was jailed for telling the truth about Israel's illegal acquirement of nuclear weapons. Anyway, more from Dan Smith on Israel.
I think so, yeah. Well, I mean, if they were to, that would be a kind of, that would be essentially illegal. So presumably they don't want to get caught in that trap. There are plenty of people in governments who know for a fact that Israel has got nuclear weapons, even if one is not absolutely sure about the exact number. But Israel's strategy has always been one of promoting uncertainty about whether it has nuclear weapons. And for one reason or another, it regards that uncertainty as being important to its security and perhaps to its reputation. But there is really no doubt that it has nuclear weapons. So, to be honest, I don't perfectly understand the logic of their position.
Good stuff. The host then asks Dan Smith a very good question.
Is the West treatment of Iran, which has been transparent about its activities for the most part, unfair?
Well, I think you should nuance the question a bit. Is the treatment by the European Union and by the European Union member states who've signed the Iran nuclear deal, is that unfair? No. Is the US treatment of Iran unfair? I think it is, because Iran signed an agreement which our assessment says is technically sound, and which the International Atomic Energy Agency has said firmly that up until now, Iran has been fully implementing that agreement. And that means there's no basis in terms of the treaty itself. There's no legal or technical basis for the US to be withdrawing from that agreement. This was due to political objections to Iran itself and to its policies and its actions. I think it is. I think it's unfair, but I think it's also regrettable in another way, because you should stick by agreements. So an action like that makes agreements less viable, less easy to reach, less reliable, perhaps in future. And I think it's also added clearly to the instability in the region. So it's also a dangerous decision.
Of course it is. That's Dan Smith from CIPRI. That's about it for Sunday View for today. It's approaching midday today, Sunday, June 23rd. 3 years since the country voted to leave the European Union, no nearer the exit door. Although I suppose some conservatives would say October 31st, we'll leave on Halloween, we'll leave, but we won't. And any deal that's done will be tantamount to staying inside the European Union anyway. That's it for the programme. I'll be back with you at 5 p.m. at UK time tomorrow, Monday, for the Richie Allen Show. We've got some really, really interesting guests lined up for the week. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Look after yourselves and one another. Going to leave you with The Pale and a song called Butterfly. Great Dublin band. One of the greatest debut albums of all time, 1992. An album called Here's One We Made Earlier. From that is Butterfly. Have a great Sunday. See you tomorrow. Bye from me. It's bye now.